So we'll discuss some Inyane Tefillah so we discussed last week the machlokas, the dispute between Rambam and Ramban on whether the nature of the mitzvah of Tefillah is biblical or rabbinical. So the Rambam's opinion is that Tefillah is a biblical mitzvah, and according to the Ramban, Tefillah is only biblical b'eis sarah, during the time of need, and the Rabbi Selevan pointed out, really it's not a fundamental machlokas, it's a local machlokas. That everyone agrees Tefillah b'eis sarah is biblical. The question is, what is considered eis sarah? What is considered time of need? So, according to the Rambam, every day is a time of need. The frailty of human life, we all have our own worries and sorrows. So, mitzvah aseh l'shpal b'chol yom. And according to the Ramban, that no, only if you have an earthquake, a war, you have some external factor. That's the machlokas Ramban. We pointed out the Gemara in Brachas and Afchav Vav Beis talks about who instituted Tefillah. So, one opinion is the Avos, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and the other opinion is Keneged Karbanos. And the conclusion of Gemara is we really combine both, because really Tefillah is Avos Tiknun, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, but what about Tefillah Musaf? That corresponds to the Karbanos, to the sacrifices, so therefore we actually combine both. So really, there are two different elements of Tefillah. Tefillah Keneged Karbanos and Tefillah Keneged Avos. That there's a fundamental difference that, as the Meshech Chochmah explained in the end of Parshas Vayechi, B'charbi v'kashti, with the sword and bow and arrow, he quotes the Targum, which explains it to mean B'salusi v'usi, with different types of prayer. What forced the Targum to take out of Pshuto Shamikra, out of the simple Pshat? So you realize that first you fight with the sword, first you do a bow and arrow, then a sword, and the fact that Torah tells us sword and bow and arrow, it's clearly not referring to literally a battle. So what is the difference between a tefillah with a zacharbi and a tefillah with a zakashti? So the Meshech Chochmah explains, a sword is something which is sharp. So if you have a very sharp sword, you nick someone in the neck or in some other area, you could kill them without much effort. But a bow and arrow, the more you pull back and the more power you put into it, so the more the tefillah is going to go. So that's what those are the two types of tefillah. So the tefillah kavua, which is from Keneged Karbanos, that's the standard tefillah. Anshe Knesset Hagadola. So therefore the mere saying of the words has a tremendous influence. We're not in touch with what the appropriate way to pray, so we follow what our rabbis have told us, the great rabbis, the Anshe Knesset Hagadola, who instituted our prayer. So that itself has inherent value. But Tefillah Keneged Avos is we all have our own independent, we all have our own personal prayers and things that we ask for. So the Avos, because Avram had his things, Yitzchak, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov all prayed in different situations. So that's why the different parts, we have the format, as well as we have our own bakashas. And you could throw in your own bakashas when you get to Atachan and Tano. You could throw in about wisdom, about someone, yourself, or someone else who's sick. Shema Koenu is more a generic one. So we see there's two types of tefillah. There's the tefillah kavua, which is keneged the avot, keneged the karbanos, the sacrifices, because it's always the same all the time. And then you have the keneged avos. So that's the Meshech Chochmah. So with this actually, we could understand something else. We mentioned in last week's parsha, Parshas Toldos, or this week's parsha, Parshas Toldos, that the famous Rashi from the Gemara in Yevamos and Afsamach Daled, Vayartelo Hashem, that he answered Yitzchak's tefillah because Eino Dome tefillah of a tzaddik ben tzaddik with tzaddik bas Russia. So the Torah in Shulchan Aruch writes, he says, what if you want to pick a shliach tzibur, if you want to pick someone who's going to lead the congregation, lead the prayer service, who should it be? A Baal Tshuva, someone who doesn't have ancestry from his family, or someone who comes from a tzaddik ben tzaddik, someone who comes from a family with yichus. So the Torah writes, Tov l'karei mizera rechokim. It's better to call someone who's, let's say, more of a Baal Tshuva. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, Shalom Shalom l'rachok l'karov. It says, Shalom Shalom l'rachok, from one who is far away to one who is closer. So even though the Bach limits it, the Torah, he says that's only if both are equal. But the only time that you use from Zerah, so he says the only time you call the Baal Tshuva if he's a bigger tzaddik than the person who's some tzaddik ben tzaddik. But if they're both equal, so then the Bach says in Marshal, so you would give it to the tzaddik. But if all things being equal, so then so he says, I know dasa Bach. The whole milosh yeshu mishu mizera rechokim rakim utzadik gadol. So he says the only time you call the rachok is if he's a bigger tzaddik. And others disagree on that halacha and say that no, the pasuk says go rachok l'karov, the Baal Tshuva gets preference. But they point out that the Torah himself writes in Hilchas Tainis that when you should call up someone, you should call up someone who is a Tefillah tzaddik ben tzaddik adifa. So it seems to be a contradiction in the Torah. When he talks in Orach Chaim, Siman and Gimel, he says you should call from the rachok. But when he says in Hilchas Tainis, Siman Tavkov Ayin Tes, he says to call the tzaddik. So based on the Meshach Chachma, so maybe we can answer up the question that when Ashik Knesses Agadola, the Tefillah Kavua, so therefore the Tefillah Kavua, so then you could say it doesn't make a difference, and then you go Shalom or Rachok or Karov, then you call up, you could have the Baal Tshuva. However, Behilchas Tainis, we're not talking about Tefillah Kavua that Anshe Knesset Agadola instituted. We're talking about special tefillos v'techinos miyuchedes. And therefore we're talking about a personal, or we're looking for schuzavos, so then, like Yitzchak, we go with tzaddik ben tzaddik. So perhaps a distinction when we go, the contradiction in the Torah, when do we call up a karov, when do we call up a rachok, someone who's close, someone far, a tefillah kavua doesn't make a difference, and perhaps even a rachok wins, but a tefillah that on your own, so therefore you need a tzaddik ben tzaddik, like we see God answered Yitzchak's tefillah. The more Ketsia, Rav Yaakov Emdin, he gives a different teretz. He gives a different answer. In Siman and Gimel, he wants to make a different distinction. He quotes in the Marshal, he says that maybe the distinction is tefillah b'yachid versus tefillah b'tzibor. It depends, are we talking about someone davening privately alone, or not in the minyan, or versus someone who's davening in the minyan? So he says, if it's a tefillah, Rabbim, if we're davening b'tzibor, so we know that everyone's tefillah will be answered, and you have the kolach hatzibor. So that's when the Torah means it's better to call zera rechokim. However, if you're talking about tefillas b'yachid, so then a tzaddik ben tzaddik is adaf, like Yitzchak and Rivka. We picked Yitzchak over Rivka. So those are possible reasons. We went into last time who's greater about tshuva or a tzaddik. And if we assume that a Baal Tshuva is greater, so why is we answer why over here was Yitzchak's tefillah? So that could be a local din in Hilchas tefillah. Either a difference between Becharbi and Bakashi, a difference between the set davening versus your own personal tachinas. When it's a set davening, so then everyone's equal. But if it's your own personal tachinas, like Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, then it goes to Tzaddik ben Tzaddik. And similarly, if it's Tefillah b'tzibur versus Tefillah b'yachid. So that's the issue with the machlokas, whether avos or karbanos. We always assume it's a mix of both. That we both have the more formal, as well as we also have for personal needs. So we are mentioning as well all the avos. We mentioned Abraham instituted tefillah, Yitzchak instituted tefillah, and Yaakov. And so it's interesting to note that the Gemara tells us in Brachas that tefillah, it's a discussion in the Gemara, but we paskin tefillah's Aravis Rishus. We paskin evening service is only optional. And therefore, the question is, why was Yaakov Avinu's tefillah discriminated against? How come when it came to the tefillah of Avram and Yitzchak, so then it's mandatory, Shacharis and Mincha? When it comes to Ma'ariv, we say it's optional. So on that, some point out, Rashi and Shabbos says maybe it's dependent on this issue. If tefillah's avos tiknun, then that's the opinion in the Gemara that Aravis is a chova. But if tefillah keneged karbano, so there is no special karban for Ma'ariv, so then that's the opinion tefillah's Aravis rishus. That's how some want to suggest. However, the Tzivah and others point out, no, this is even true, even if you assume tefillah keneged avos, even if you assume Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. So how come Yaakov's tefillah was discriminated against? So some point out because they didn't have in mind to be koveyet for future generations. So for instance, as we mentioned to begin this year, that everyone agrees that tefillah be'esara is a din d'oraisa, is a biblical tefillah. So we know Yaakov was davening, the stones were surrounding him from wild animals, he was on the run from Esav, he was b'makam sakana, it was a time of sar. So therefore it's an esara. So therefore, maybe you can't bring me a proof. By Abraham and Yitzchak, they were instituting it for future, they were being koveyed for future generations. But by Yaakov, he might have just been davening because he was in a place of danger. But if he wasn't in danger, maybe he wouldn't have in mind. So therefore, tefillah of Aravis never took on the same status as the other ones. In fact, Tosas asked in Brachas on the Chavava and Aleph, what do you mean tefillah Aravis rishus? Because Tosas asked, we know the Gemara tells us there's a concept of tashlumin. You make up a tefillah. In other words, if I miss Shacharis, I make it up at Mincha. If I miss Mincha, what about making it up for Ma'ariv because it's a different day? Because in Judaism we begin the day at night. Vayerev Eiboker. Nevertheless, the Gemara says we do make up. If we miss Mincha, we make it up by 2 Shemona Esreis at Ma'ariv. And similarly, you forget Ma'ariv, you make it up with the second Shemona Esrei at Shacharis. So we know there's a halacha of Tashlumin. So Tosas asked, the Gemara says in Brachas, the end of the 4th parak, that what happens if one Ma'ariv forgets to say Yalav Yavo? You forgot to daven on Rosh Chodesh, you daven Mincha, or you daven Ma'ariv, we should say, and you left out Yalav Yavo. If you didn't daven Ma'ariv at all, so of course, so we'll see also, but if you daven Ma'ariv and you left out Yalav Yavo, so the Gemara says you don't have to go back. So I would have thought, why don't I have to go back? Because I didn't have to daven in the first place. Since Tefillas Aravis is a rishus, so if it's optional, I didn't have to daven in the first place. Why do I have to go back? So, yet the Gemara gives a different reason. Ein mekadosh es hachodesh ba'layla. We don't sanctify the moon at night. Basin doesn't mean at night. So therefore, Tosas asks, what do we need the reason of Ein Mekadeshin Es HaChodesh B'Layla, that Basin doesn't convene at night, and hence you don't have to go back? Anyway, it's Tefillas Aravis. Tefillas Aravis is a Rishus, so why do you have to go back? So Tosas himself answers, he has different answers in different places, but Tosas here answers, Ein HaChinami, you're right. that when we say rishus doesn't necessarily mean optional. Like then it gives the different cases. Tosas doesn't give, but there are other places where we contrast. Let's say matzah on the first night versus the rest of matzah. We find the expression used in the Gemara, rishus and chov, in contrast. Not that it's necessarily, not that it means it's optional per se, but it means low level obligation. So Tosas writes, it's not that Arvis is optional. You have to daven Ma'ariv, but you can't nullify it b'chinam for no reason. But if you have a mitzvah overes, if you have a passing mitzvah, so then other certain times it will take precedence over Ma'ariv. I'm sure you'll have certain times that other mitzvahs will take precedence over mincha. So whatever that criteria is that Tosas doesn't give us, the criteria is lower for Ma'ariv. That there's a certain mitzvah overes, a passing mitzvah that mincha we would do, but Ma'ariv we wouldn't do because Ma'ariv is not a rishus. It's not optional, but it's on a low level obligation. So that's a Tosas right, and that's why you do have to go back, because it's not optional. It just means, and that's why the Gemara had to give another reason. Ein makadosh es hachodesh balayla. You had to give that reason because, and not to say Ira is rishus, because rishus does not mean optional. So that's how they explain. There's a famous bahag, which we'll have to continue with another time. But there's a famous bahag that writes, even though it's true that that even though it's true that Tefillos Arv is rishus, but Shavya Lakachova, it might have been at one point in Jewish history optional, but today we don't have that choice. Klal Yisrael in a good senses took on Ma'ariv as something that the Ma'ariv nighttime represents Golus, Chutz La'aretz. So we point out so Jews in a good wisdom have taken on Ma'ariv as a chova. And we'll see if there's any difference now that we take Ma'ariv as a chova. Is it treated the same way? But so we'll have to come back to that point. But just to conclude, but where else do we see that Arvis is fundamentally different? It's a rishus. So we know by Shacharis and Mincha, we have Chazaras Hashatz. We have the Shliach Tzibur goes ahead and repeats the Shemona Esrei for the congregation. We have it by Shacharis and Mincha. We don't have it on Ma'ariv. Why don't we have it on Ma'ariv? We don't have it on Ma'ariv since Tefillos Arv is rishus. It was optional, so therefore it was optional, therefore they never set it up as an obligation. They never set up Chazaras Hashatz. Or as the Rambam points out in other cases, that Ein Medaktik Mizman, we don't have to be so careful for Ma'ariv at what time, because Arv is a rishus. So we see Tefillos Arv is a rishus, whether rishus means optional or just low level obligation. Either way, Ma'ariv is different, but still, if you don't daven Ma'ariv, there is a loch of tasrum because you have to make it up. We'll have to continue in terms of today. Now that Arv is Shavya Lakachova, are there any differences? Do we treat it like a chova, or do we treat it like a rishus?